Good evening. I've just come back earlier this week from signing books at my first two books at the Miami Book Fair. I wanted to talk just a little bit tonight about why the history of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and its repeal and the whole subject of gays in the military was important for so many other issues. And I'll start just with a topical picture, and it never seems to stay in place, but it's a picture from 2010, the day of the repeal, and I'll run through the main topics. One of the I think the underlying concept that is so important in many others is the idea that sometimes we have to deal with being in confined spaces with others in positions of forced intimacy. And that used to be dorms when I started college in 1961, and that was a big issue. My even appearing to be gay was a big issue. And then it was a big issue for the military and debating Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the 1990s. Not so much of an issue by the time I served in the military myself in 1968. But then it's also today probably an issue in women's spaces, as we know from the debate over gender identity. One of the biggest reasons is that whether we like it or not, we live in a society where sometimes we have to operate even though we want to be individuals, we have to operate as part of a group, and we have to deal with the external world around us, even far away from us, and even with remote threats. And males are sometimes forced to share risks and the idea of possible sacrifice, and sometimes so are females, although a bit differentially because they have the risk of childbirth. That was something that was impressed on me when I was growing up, that I as a man would be expected to be able to protect women and children. And even though if something happens, and at various times we've had war and we've had a draft, and I dealt with the Vietnam era draft which ended in 1973. The selective service registration is still in effect, and given the way the world is now, with two major problems around the world, in China and Russia and the Middle East and various other things, we don't know that it could end with the problems of maybe finite resources, including climate change. We don't know that it couldn't happen, even though it should be debated. So it's a very serious issue. So conflict anywhere in the world, in a sense, can become my problem eventually. Even the fact that all males in Ukraine are subject to the draft if they're under 60 in a modern country that's trying to become Western, and sending refugees and so forth over here, that's another issue. There's a sponsorship program and everything. That's a moral problem for me, potentially, as a male. So, yeah. And so if I would feel at least if I was of age, those who wasn't able to share equitably the risks other people have to take, I'm overprivileged and I would be morally inferior. And that's exactly that was what was impressed on me when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s. Military service is also closely recorded as security clearances and sometimes other civilian occupations. Back in the 70s, there were arguments about gays working as firemen in firehouses, and there have been other situations where there's intimacy where this can come up. And of course, it's very important as career opportunities for the underprivileged. And today, the accepted progress in what we think of as equal rights for gays, could be undermined by the aftermath of the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the in June of 22, and the comments about substantive due process and whether that can, the right of privacy, whether that's as guaranteed as we thought it was. So it could be in play again. And the left, with its over dependence on the idea of finding groups that are marginalized and then labeling who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed, that's not a very convincing way to talk about this. I also want to just mention you shouldn't confuse this with the transgender ban, which Trump tried to put in and which Biden largely overlifted for those that are transitioned and stable, that is. And so that's actually was a different issue. People do have to register for selective service based on sex observed or recorded at birth, and no one has addressed that. Now, Congress really should take up the draft. It should take up whether women should be expected to register, or it could also take up whether it wants to do away with it, but that doesn't, with selective service registration, but it doesn't sound very likely. But that's what I wanted to say about the importance of don't ask, don't tell, even as it's kind of disturbing today and not what a lot of people like to hear. But I do thank you for listening.